There is a powerful misunderstanding in relationships that we need to challenge. The idea that being low maintenance automatically makes you more lovable, more attractive, or easier for someone to stay with. We are taught that the ideal partner is the person who doesn't ask for much, doesn't complain, doesn't need reassurance, and can tolerate almost anything without making it a problem. But there is a difference between being emotionally secure and making yourself emotionally invisible. And when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies, that distinction becomes incredibly important. You may think, if I give them space, they'll feel comfortable. If I don't ask where this relationship is going, they won't feel pressured. If I never complain about their distance, they'll eventually realize how easy I am to be with. But here's the psychological trap. When you constantly suppress your needs in order to preserve someone else's comfort, you are not necessarily creating intimacy. You may simply be creating a relationship where the other person never has to encounter the reality of what you need. That matters because intimacy requires reality. You cannot build deep connection by presenting a version of yourself that requires nothing. Eventually, the person has to know what matters to you, what hurts you, what you value, and what you will or will not accept. Otherwise, they are not actually connecting with you. They are connecting with the carefully edited version of you that you created to prevent them from pulling away. And this is where many people lose their power. They begin monitoring every message. They wonder whether they should respond immediately or wait. They calculate how much affection is too much. They become terrified that expressing disappointment will make the avoidant disappear. So they become increasingly accommodating while secretly becoming increasingly resentful. That is not emotional strength. Emotional strength is being able to say, I care about you, but I am not going to abandon myself to keep you comfortable. Think about that for a moment. There is nothing wrong with giving someone space. There is nothing wrong with being independent. There is nothing wrong with understanding that people have different emotional rhythms. The problem begins when understanding becomes self-neglect. Because every time you silence a legitimate need simply because you're afraid someone might leave, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson. Their comfort matters more than your truth. And over time, that destroys self-respect. The goal should never be to become so low maintenance that someone never has to rise to meet you. The goal is to become so emotionally grounded that you can communicate what you need without begging, chasing, manipulating, or threatening. That is a completely different form of power. You can say, I understand that you need space. I respect that. But I also need consistency in a relationship. You can say, I don't expect constant communication, but I do expect mutual effort. You can say, I care about you, but I won't participate indefinitely in a connection that leaves me confused. Notice what is missing from those statements. Desperation. You are not demanding that another person become someone they are not. You are simply defining the conditions under which you are willing to participate, and that is what secure behavior looks like. The irony is that when you stop trying so desperately to be easy to love, you often become much more compelling, not because you're playing games, but because you're finally operating from authenticity. You are no longer saying, how little can I need so they won't leave? You are asking a far more powerful question. Can this person meet me where I genuinely am? That question changes everything, because love should not require you to continuously shrink yourself. A healthy relationship has room for two complete human beings, two people with needs, boundaries, fears, ambitions, imperfections, and expectations. So don't confuse being peaceful with being passive. Don't confuse independence with emotional suppression. And don't confuse giving someone space with giving away your standards. You don't need to become harder to love. You need to become unwilling to abandon yourself just to remain loved. The moment you stop minimizing your needs to keep someone, you begin discovering whether they were truly capable of meeting you in the first place. Now, once you understand that being low maintenance does not mean becoming invisible, the next question is this: what actually changes the dynamic when you are dealing with someone who tends to withdraw, create distance, or become uncomfortable with emotional closeness? The answer is not to chase harder, it is not to demand more attention, and it certainly isn't to punish them with silence. The answer is boundaries. Because there is a profound difference between giving someone space and giving someone unlimited access to you without accountability. A person with avoidant tendencies may genuinely need independence. They may become overwhelmed by emotional intensity. They may need time to process their feelings before communicating them. Understanding that can be compassionate and mature. But compassion without boundaries can become self-abandonment. If someone repeatedly disappears, communicates inconsistently, avoids meaningful conversations, or only becomes attentive when they fear losing you, and you continue accepting the same pattern without consequence, you are unintentionally teaching the relationship that inconsistency is acceptable. And here's the psychological principle you need to understand. People learn the boundaries of a relationship through what is consistently tolerated. You don't have to lecture someone into respecting you. You don't have to convince them that your needs are legitimate. Your behavior communicates your standards far more powerfully than your explanations ever will. Imagine someone knows that they can withdraw for days, return whenever they feel lonely, offer a little affection, and immediately regain your full attention. What incentive exists for them to develop greater consistency? This isn't about manipulating them, it's about recognizing human behavior. When access to your time, energy, attention, and emotional intimacy is available regardless of how someone treats you, the relationship may never be challenged to evolve. But when you establish a calm, clear boundary, something different happens. You communicate through your actions, I care about you, but I also care about how I am treated. That's powerful. And notice that a boundary is not a threat. A threat says, if you don't do what I want, I'll punish you. A boundary says, if this pattern continues, I will make a decision about what I participate in. That distinction separates emotional maturity from emotional control. You don't need to tell an avoidant, you better change or I'm gone. You can simply stop overfunctioning. Stop being the person who always initiates. Stop explaining yourself endlessly. Stop rescuing every uncomfortable conversation. Stop interpreting every withdrawal as an emergency that you must solve. Let their behavior belong to them. If they need space, give them space. But don't spend that space waiting beside the phone, analyzing every message, and putting your entire emotional life on hold. Live. Build your career. Strengthen your friendships. Pursue your goals. Take care of your mind. Develop your interests. Become deeply invested in your own life. Because the most powerful boundary isn't always something you say. Sometimes it is what you stop doing. You stop chasing someone who is consistently running. You stop proving that you're worthy of basic effort. You stop accepting crumbs simply because you're afraid that asking for the whole meal will make them leave. And here's where this becomes philosophical. Your standards are not merely rules for other people. They are promises you make to yourself. Every time you enforce a healthy boundary, you're saying, my emotional well-being matters, my time matters, my dignity matters, my presence has value. That changes your internal identity. And when your identity changes, your behavior changes. You no longer approach the relationship from the question, how do I make this person stay? You approach it from the question, is this relationship capable of becoming something healthy and mutual? That is a completely different position of power. And paradoxically, this may also create the only environment in which an avoidant person can genuinely confront their own behavior. When you stop compensating for their distance, they are left with their own choices. They have the opportunity to recognize what their withdrawal creates. But whether they change is ultimately their responsibility. Your responsibility is to decide what you will participate in. So don't use boundaries as a strategy to make someone chase you. Use boundaries as a declaration of self-respect. Because the goal isn't to make an avoidant afraid of losing you. The goal is to become so secure in your own value that you are no longer willing to lose yourself just to keep them. Your boundary is not a wall against love. It is the line that tells you where self-respect begins. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most important shift. The goal is not to become easier for an avoidant person to handle. The goal is to become more secure within yourself. Because if you spend your entire relationship trying to figure out how to behave so that another person won't withdraw, you have already placed your emotional stability in their hands. You start thinking, maybe I should text less. Maybe I should ask for less. Maybe I should stop showing how much I care. Maybe if I become completely independent, they won't feel trapped. But notice what is happening. Your life becomes a reaction to their emotional patterns. That isn't freedom. Security doesn't mean you never want reassurance. It doesn't mean you never miss someone. It doesn't mean you become so detached that nothing affects you. Secure strength means you can experience your emotions without allowing those emotions to control your decisions. You can care deeply without chasing. You can love someone without abandoning yourself. You can give space without putting your life on pause. And you can want a relationship without needing that particular person to validate your worth. That distinction is transformative. Because when you become secure, your focus shifts from controlling the outcome to controlling your response. You cannot control whether someone chooses intimacy. You cannot control whether they are ready for commitment. You cannot control whether they recognize your value today, tomorrow, or 6 months from now. But you can control whether you continue participating in a pattern that consistently violates your standards. That's where personal power begins. Think about how many people live in emotional negotiation. They're constantly trying to earn closeness. They give more affection when the other person pulls away. They become extra understanding when communication decreases. They accept ambiguity because they believe patience will eventually produce commitment. But love should not become an audition where you continuously perform the role of the perfect partner, hoping someone will finally select you. You don't need to prove that you're worthy of consistency. You need to decide that consistency is something you require. And this is why becoming secure is so much more powerful than becoming low maintenance. Low maintenance says, I don't need much from you. Security says, I know what I need and I can walk away if it isn't available. Low maintenance says, I'll tolerate this because I don't want to lose you. Security says, I care about you, but I won't lose myself to keep you. Low maintenance is often built around fear. Security is built around self-trust, and self-trust changes everything. When you trust yourself, you don't have to decode every delayed response. You don't have to turn every period of distance into a psychological investigation. You don't have to constantly ask whether someone still cares. You observe, you communicate, you make decisions based on patterns rather than isolated moments. That is emotional maturity. And here's something else. Becoming secure doesn't guarantee that an avoidant person will suddenly pursue you. That's not the purpose. If your entire strategy is designed to make someone chase you, you're still making them the center of your emotional world. The real transformation happens when their decision no longer determines your identity. If they move closer, you evaluate whether their actions are consistent. If they move away, you don't collapse. If they return, you don't immediately forget what happened. If they disappear, you don't chase them into the distance. You remain grounded. That's what it means to become anchored in yourself. And perhaps the greatest paradox of relationships is this. The less desperately you need someone to choose you, the more clearly you can see whether they actually are choosing you. You stop being distracted by potential and start observing reality. You stop asking, how can I make this work? And you start asking, is this working for both of us? That question can save you years of emotional confusion, because your worth was never determined by how much someone was willing to tolerate, how often they contacted you, or how intensely they pursued you. Your worth existed before they arrived. Your job is not to convince someone of that worth. Your job is to live from it. So become independent, but don't become emotionally unavailable. Become understanding, but don't become endlessly tolerant. Become loving, but don't become self-abandoning. And above all, become secure enough to let people reveal who they are without trying to force them into becoming who you need them to be. Stop trying to become easier to love, become stronger in knowing what kind of love you will accept.